we will go ahead and go forward. This is the second of our monthly educational seminars that happen on Saturdays. So this is the second one for 2024. We welcome everybody that has joined. If this is your first experience with us at Parkinson Support and Wellness, we're glad that you're here and look forward to seeing you again. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to a member of our board and the chair of our program committee, Maureen Gartner. Maureen, good morning.
Thanks. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everybody. How nice to see such a crowd. Lindsey, we can't wait for you to turn our lives around. I'm happy to welcome Lindsey Hershberger this morning. She comes with a lot of experience. She had her Bachelor of Science in Biology from Ohio University and then a doctorate in physical therapy from Ohio State. Apparently, somewhere along the line, she developed a passion for patients with neurodegenerative diseases. So we're very fortunate for that. Plus, she's in a low service area of ours up in Waynesville. So for any of you that live around Mainville or Waynesville area, you'd be great to hook up with her. She has 3 energetic young boys that keep them busy. And she likes to travel and hike and listen to music around the fire pit. That sounds good with me as long as there's alcohol involved. Oh no, did I say that? So welcome, Lindsey. We're really happy to have you.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to be here. And first of all, everybody can hear me, right? Everybody, we're good there? Okay. So thank you for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody today. And gosh, I really appreciate how many people are tuning in and giving, spending an hour of this beautiful sunny Saturday to hopefully learn as much as we can about freezing of gait. So with that, I will try to jump right into the presentation. Okay, I think we're good. Can you guys see my slides now? Awesome, and everybody can hear me. Fantastic. Okay, let me move a couple things on my screen around so I can see, and we will get rolling. Okay, so yes, like Maureen mentioned, I'm a physical therapist. I have been working now for almost 15 years, and the majority of those 15 years I have spent working with patients with Parkinson's disease. And then just in the last couple years, I started my own clinic, specializing in Parkinson's in Waynesville. So that's kind of my background, and let's get right into the freezing of gait. So, whoop. There we go. Okay. So what is freezing of gait? The basics. Freezing of gait is the temporary, involuntary inability to move when you want to move, basically. So this can have a really wide variety in terms of severity. It can last seconds, in which the freezing episode might look almost like a trembling in the leg or a stutter step. Or it can be more severe and last longer periods of time, up to minutes, where it can actually feel like your feet are glued to the floor. Your feet are stuck in cement, some people describe it as, and you might actually require the assistance of a second person or a handheld or some sort of a cue to get going again. So it can be very brief up to a significant, like you need help from someone else to get going again. So that's the basics of what freezing is. Freezing of gait is, of course, super frustrating, right? There's a huge impact. You guys probably don't need me to tell you this, but it's annoying, it's frustrating, it impacts your life in a negative way. It has the potential to reduce your independence, and it's dangerous, right? So if we talk about fall risk, we know that Parkinson's, folks with Parkinson's end up being at an increased fall risk, of course, than people without Parkinson's. And then people with Parkinson's and freezing of gait are at a higher fall risk than their peers with Parkinson's that don't experience freezing of gait. So certainly something we want to address early. And then these last two at the bottom, I think the isolating and the decline in activity, these are big impacts that I think we might tend to overlook, maybe not realize quite as much, but oftentimes people who are experiencing freezing might not be going out and about as much as you used to, right? Because of that unpredictability. It can be embarrassing if it happens out in public. And so we just kind of stop doing as much of the things that we love, right? The joy things. And then kind of along the same lines, we often see folks that have more severe freezing might start moving less, right? Why? Because when I move, I freeze. So how do I avoid freezing? I don't move as much, right? And so it's this vicious cycle. Hopefully everyone listening already knows the importance of exercise, and I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, right? But exercise is a must for Parkinson's, okay? And so once we start to drop the activity level or the exercise level down, that can have a negative snowball effect, certainly for our long-term trajectory. So the big message here is, if you're someone who's tuning in and maybe you're not even sure if what you're experiencing is freezing, right? Maybe it's just starting, it's very brief. Go ahead and talk to your neurologist about that anyway, right? Bring it up to your team, because you want to start treating that sooner than later. The sooner you start, the better. So why does freezing happen? We're really not completely sure, but the sort of the leading theory from what I've read is that there is a relationship basically between freezing and cognitive difficulties. Okay, so cognitive difficulties meaning specifically attention, right? And so what I mean by that, if we think of that in just like a life example, when we are walking around our house, it's almost impossible that we're just walking, right? Like our brain is processing all kinds of other information outside of the walking. So maybe we're walking and having a conversation with our spouse. Maybe we're walking and thinking about the to-do list for the day. Maybe we're walking and carrying a bag of groceries in, right? Or we're attending to our dog that's running around under our feet, or we're paying attention to the transition between the floor of the carpet to the tile. So all of these things that are happening in the background, generally we're processing, excuse me, 1 second. So generally we're processing these things without having to think too much about them. But in those who freeze, what we see is that of all of the tasks that are going on at once, the people who freeze tend to prioritize, let's say, the cognitive task, but basically the other thing, right? All the other things become priority, and then the motor task or the walking task is at the bottom of the list, okay? And so when your brain can't attend to all the different things successfully at once, the last thing on the list, the bottom of the totem pole, is the walking, and that's when the freezing shows up, okay? So the leading kind of theory is that there's a cognitive piece and attention piece with the freezing. So freezing of gait is complex. It's complex to live with. It's complex to treat, okay? And so the best results certainly are going to come with a personalized approach and with a team approach, okay? And so I would say that I've got the important members of your anti-freeze team or your team roster listed here, and we're gonna call your team captain as your neurologist, or if you're lucky enough to have a movement disorder specialist in your area, your movement disorder specialist, right? So they're kind of stop one team captain. If their role is going to be to try to help, of course, get your medications optimized. And what I mean by the term optimized is basically try to get that dopamine level at a nice steady state throughout the day so that you can feel and function your best, okay? Signs that medicine might not be optimized is if we think about the course of time, we're good, and then maybe the medicine starts to wear off for an hour, and then your function drops, and oh, here now I'm going to have an hour of freezing, and then I take my next dose, and then I'm good. And then you have a valley again, or more freezing. And so some of that can just be what it is, but a lot of that can be improved when your neurologist can impact or adjust the medication. So they can be doing different dosage, they can be doing different time spacing that you take it throughout the day, maybe adding a new medicine on board, right? All of that is for the team captain, the neurologist, to help guide you through, right? But that's step one, of course. So start with that neurologist. And then the other members of the team that you should really always have is going to be your physical therapist, your family and friends, which they play a really important role in several areas, and I'll kind of highlight them throughout the talk as to their role. I use the term exercise trainer, an exercise person. So that can be a personal trainer, that could be your group exercise class leader, that could be the lady on the YouTube video that you're watching that exercise, or maybe it's even just yourself, right? You have a program that you're exercising along with, maybe that your PT gave you. But certainly an exercise piece should be a consistent piece of every anti-freeze program. And then at the bottom here, we have an occupational therapist and a mental health professional. Those are not always members of a team, but I would say an occupational therapist can often be, and then probably less common, but certainly not rare, potentially a mental health professional might be a member of the team. And so again, through the presentation, I'll kind of hopefully try to help you key in to when some symptoms that might signal, hey, let me recruit a new player on my team. Let's add them to my roster. But it's the responsibility won't all fall on you to figure that out. The teammates that you already have will also help you figure that out, right? They might see, hey, Susie's having trouble with such and such, and OT would be really valuable for that. Okay, so the existing teammates will help you expand your team if needed, and then I'll also kind of help you think of situations where you might benefit from the others. So again, freezing is complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, like you've probably heard before, right? There's no one size fits all approach. There's probably no one size fits two approach, really. So when I have a client come to me either for physical therapy or for our personal fitness program called Anti-Freeze Bootcamp, we start by trying to kind of break down and categorize their potential freezing, okay? And when I do that, that helps the client themselves understand maybe what might make them at higher risk, might helps them understand how to deal with it, and then it helps me as their provider build a plan that's really personalized to them versus a generic anti-freeze plan. So I would encourage you, if it's convenient, if you can grab a blank piece of paper and a pen and just jot some notes with these three headings as we go. And my hope is that then by the end of this hour, you'll be able to categorize your particular situation a little bit better. So again, then you feel more in control and have a better understanding of some actions that you can take to help. And then the notes can be really helpful to share with the members of your medical team, right? This can be very valuable information to them. So on the top of your paper, we'd have one area or column that we're going to talk about how to classify your timing of your freezing, the preceding factors, right? So what happens before the freezing occurs that might make freezing more likely, and then the situational triggers. So what are the day-to-day movements that you're doing when the freezing occurs? So those are the three ways I try to think about it for any client that comes to me for help. So the first category here is timing. So when you're thinking timing, it's helpful to sort of look at a 24-hour period of the day, right? And so over that 24 hours, when is your freezing the most noticeable? Is it in the mornings? Is it in the evening, night? Maybe it's more, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, dependent on where you are in your medication cycle, right? So if, for example, you take your medicine every 4 hours, we'll say maybe you started at 8 a.m. and you're good from 8 to 11 or 11:30, but come 11:30, your freezing really starts to show up, right? And it's not quite time to get that next dose of medicine. And so maybe you have a rough time between 11:30 and maybe even to 12:30 while you're waiting for the next dose to absorb. So cyclic freezing like that goes along with your medication schedule is also going to be really important to note, okay? This information is super valuable for your doctor, right? Because then they can help figure out how should they be adjusting their dosage and the timing of the medicine. And then it can also be really valuable for your therapist, right? Your PT or potentially your OT, because maybe you're good through, excuse me, it's going to be a miracle if I still have my voice by the end of this. But you're going to give this information to the PT or OT, and let's say you're pretty good throughout the day, but mornings are really rough for you. Well, then the PT or the OT or both can sort of analyze, okay, what has to happen for you in the morning, right? You wake up and what are the tasks that you have to complete? How can we make those tasks safer? How can we modify the tasks to, avoid as much freezing? How can we supplement and give you extra help or cues? Or maybe how can we plan your day around that time, right? And try to put some of the tasks in a different area of the day where you're functioning a little bit better. So the timing has an important role for both your doctors and your therapist there. And so then now we're on to the kind of the second category that I always like to have clients think about. And these are the factors that happen right before the freezing occurs, okay? So preceding factors, think prevention here, right? We're trying to prevent or at least reduce the frequency of freezing with these three situations. So I'll talk more about each, but foot position, stooped posture, and small steps. All three of these things fuel freezing, right? So it's like putting gasoline on the fire. They don't cause freezing, but if freezing's in place and these three things are happening, the freezing's more likely to show up. So in terms of what do we do about this? These are really things that your therapist, your PT, and potentially your OT can help you design exercises and strategies for. And your family and your inner circle of friends, right? Like your people, your crew play a really big role here, right? And so the reason that is the three we'll say movements or positions are all things that most likely have been happening for years, right? They're things that you're doing without thinking about. They're just kind of a part of the way you move. And so when we go and we practice those things during therapy, in most cases, we're getting a couple hours of therapy in a week of coaching and practice. But then we go home and we have all those other hours in the day. So family and friends helping to be on board and kind of getting gentle cueing when you start to notice some of these things is a super valuable way to be getting the practice and trying to help make some of these things stick around for longer, right? Become more effective. And certainly that can be a slippery slope, right? Like we don't want to make the caregivers or the family and friends feel like they always have to be coaching. That doesn't feel good, and it doesn't feel good to the person necessarily receiving the coaching. So, you guys everybody kind of figures out a system that works well for you. And sometimes it's not even a word, it's just a little tap on the shoulder, right? Nobody else around you knows what you're doing, right? They just think you're giving a little love tap, right? But that's your little cue. Oh, honey, posture, right? Let's stand up straight before we start walking, right? So you can do subtle little reminders there. But family and friends are going to have a big role in these three that we're going to talk about. So narrow foot position is our first fuel for freezing, okay? And so if we look at this slide, your typical foot position is in the top right corner up here, okay? So generally we stand with our feet about hip width apart. But what we often see in folks with Parkinson's, and especially folks with Parkinson's and freezing of gait, is that your base of support, right, or basically your foot position gets narrower, okay? Oftentimes I see heels touching, right, or the whole feet are touching. And that's a big deal for a couple of reasons, right? So if you stand up, and you don't have to do it now, but at a later time where you have something steady you can grab onto if you need, if you stand up and put your feet positioned close and have somebody give you some gentle nudges, right, and see how you feel with your balance, and then put your feet wider, right? I'd say hip width apart or a little bit wider, and have somebody give you some nudges, right? You're going to feel very different in your ability to react and your stability. So that's really important for reducing your fall risk. But the piece that applies directly to freezing is our ability to weight shift so that we can take a step, okay? And so what I mean by that is under normal circumstances, when we walk, we go through this process that we don't have to think about. It just automatically happens. But every step, if I need to step with my right leg, well, I'm going to shift my weight over onto the left leg, which frees up my right leg to take a step, okay? And then vice versa. Now I need to step with my left, so I shift right and take a step, okay? So that process happens thousands of times a day, millions of times a day probably, as we step. But if your feet are so close together like that, you can't effectively do a weight shift, which means you can't get that good step, okay? So cue freezing, right? So by simply being more aware of your foot position, that can have a big impact on freezing. And I put some examples on this slide. I just typed in athlete stance, right? And so, or I think I just typed in athletics or something, some generic search term. But you can look on each of the 3 different sports here that we're showing. If you look at the foot position of an athlete, do you ever see a foot position that looks like the top left, right? Even check out your umpire in the back, right? What are his feet like, right? So when these guys need to be ready to react and to react quickly, they're going to have their feet nice and wide, right? And so they can shift and react to recover balance, react to take a step, that athletic stance. So I'm not telling you that you need to walk around like a baseball player with your feet wide and crouched or anything like that, but I want you to kind of connect the dots of what your foot position can do for your stability and your ability to react, okay? So certainly the goal is at least hip width apart for your feet, okay? If not a little bit wider. So that's our first piece of our fuel. And then the next 2 things, very common that fuel freezing as well. So we've got stooped posture or small steps, okay? So either of those things, if you stand up and you have not come to a full stand, your chances that your first couple steps are going to be freezing are going to increase. And then if your first step is small, then that leads to small steps from there, right? And that can lead to that kind of fast walking. The fancy term is called festination, right? But if you've seen festination or if you experience it, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, where your feet start moving quicker necessarily than you want them to. Your steps get really short. You can as you're leaning forward, your weight shifts up onto your toes a little bit, like you can see in the picture of the gentleman on the treadmill there, right? And so then those short, fast, uncontrolled steps, forward lean, can result in your feet staying behind and your body going forward and then the freezing. So certainly at each time we get up, we stand and we're aware of our posture, stand tall, head to ceiling, right? Start tall and then start with a nice big quality step. And those are going to be good strategies to try to help the freezing in the first place. Those are your prevention kind of strategies. Okay, So then our last category is now kind of thinking about your situational triggers. There's a ton of words on this slide. Don't feel like you have to read through it all. I'm not going to read through it all. But what I did was I basically listed out some of the most common situations that my clients tell me that they freeze, right? Or that I witness, I see them freezing. And then I gave on the left-hand side, the 4 big ways that I tend to categorize these triggers as a physical therapist, okay? You certainly don't need to get that far into the weeds, right? But I also think you might be able to scan this and say, hey, I really relate to a certain category, right? And once we really relate to a certain category, then that can be, again, helpful information to get really specific in how we treat. Because we might be doing something very different if your triggers seem to be more multitasking and cognitive related versus if they seem to be more visual spatial and you're having trouble more with tight spaces or doorways, right? We might be having a different approach there. So again, on your own time, or you can do it now, you can read through those. It's rare that anyone says, yep, I'm all in the physical category. It's just, yep, that's it, that's me. Most of the time, one is most obvious, and then there's layers of, yeah, I can kind of relate to the stress category sometimes too, or yeah, every now and again that visual spatial, but boy, that cognitive, that's the hard area for me, right? And so it can help us again kind of say, where do we need to focus, right? Where do we start? And it can be helpful information, again, to share with your team. It will help them help you if you can identify some patterns. Okay, so now you're getting to the good stuff, right? What do we do when the freezing happens? So cueing is one way that we can impact freezing. And so we'll talk kind of a little bit about why cueing works, right? And so if we think about, first of all, the problem with freezing, Parkinson's lives in an area of our brain called the basal ganglia. So I think of the basal ganglia as the autopilot in our brain, okay? So this is gonna control automatic things that we don't have to think about under typical circumstances. That's walking. Well, the damaged neurons from the Parkinson's disease and the basal ganglia, I say causes your autopilot to short circuit, okay? And so that's when your freezing is gonna show up. So what we do is we try to tap into a different area of our brain away from the basal ganglia, and we choose goal-oriented tasks, okay? Or basically tasks that we are now attending to or intentional versus it's something that's automatic. We bypass the area using cues by focusing on a specific goal. So there are kind of 3 categories as a PT that I think of for cueing: movement-based cues, visual cues, and auditory cues. As I talk through these, please keep in mind that, you know, like anything with Parkinson's, it's all really personalized. So not every cue that you hear will be helpful. Some of them will. And the other piece is, my goal here is to share as much information that hopefully helps as many people as I can. So I'm going through a lot of different cues. Please don't feel like you have to leave here and try all the cues, right? In fact, that's probably would backfire. That would be a bad strategy. Pick one, right? So as I talk through, hopefully one of them will resonate with you or seem like, yeah, that's something I could try pretty easily, and start there, right? And try that one for a few days. And okay, that one, didn't do much. Let's try something else. If you want to really just do 1 or 2 cues, most people end up sticking with, they find a couple cues that work. And then my other plug is, if you're not already in a PT or seeing a PT, or if you haven't yet, PTs are going to be really helpful in helping you figure out what cues are most helpful for which situation, okay? So we'll talk through some of the ones that I find to be just broadly most impactful. So first, we're starting with movement-based cues. So the very first one is, I just call this the reset. So I think of four S's here, and the reset is going to be good when you're walking along and then you can feel the steps are starting to pick up. You're starting to lean forward a little bit. You're not in a full-blown freezing episode yet, but it's coming, right? And so rather than trying to walk through and step through the freezing episode, if you can stop, stand tall, right, reset. And if you happen to be in a situation where you've popped up onto your toes, that happens a lot. When you stand tall, push the heels back down, right? Just take a minute. Then from there, you're going to do an intentional weight shift, right? So if you want to if you're trying to take your first step with your left, then you're going to shift to the right and you're going to make that first step a big step. Okay, so that's kind of a rescue strategy, I would say. You're in the middle of a freeze, stop, stand tall, shift, big step. Okay, so that's one movement-based cueing strategy you could try. Another movement-based strategy is big step counting. So I find this strategy works really well when you have a specific destination endpoint, or you have an endpoint that you're walking toward. And it works well in situations where you know that you're likely to freeze. Okay, so if you tend to freeze after dinner when it's time to take your plate over to the sink, this might be a good time to use this strategy. This strategy is less effective if you're out walking in a big open space, right? Or doing a big long walk. It really works for kind of short incremental distances. But for example, if you are sitting in this chair here at the dinner table and you're ready to get over to that sink, what I would try first is you stand up and the sink's kind of around the other side there of the cabinet. So I'd probably break my path into 2 steps. And so my first target is going to be from the chair out to the edge of the island right here. And so I'm going to say, oh, I bet you I could get there. That'd probably take me 8 steps to get there. I don't know, just throwing a number out. But I want to be making sure that I'm focusing on my big steps. So I'm going to try to do it in 7. Okay. And as I'm walking, either out loud or in my head, so nobody even knows I'm doing it, I'm counting my steps out loud, right? So I've switched from automatic to intentional using that different part of the brain. I'm saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm there. So now at the edge of the counter, I got to make it over to the sink. And I can probably do that in 5 steps, but I want to make them big, so I'm going to shoot for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so you're counting your steps as you go, again, making it an intentional task. So there's a strategy you could try. That one I find also works well with doorways, right? If you're trying to make it through a doorway, if you can pick a target on the other side of the doorway, right? Like a picture frame or a chair on the other side, and you put your attention on that and less attention on the doorway, and then you count your steps of how long you predict it will take you to get through. Okay, wide turn focus. So most people, or a lot of people, have trouble with turning. I would say this is one of the most commonly reported problems. We see better results when people can make a big wide turn, like you're walking in an arc, versus a tight pivot style turn. So when people have this space available in the room or wherever your environment is, if you have the luxury of a wide turn, I like to have people envision like they're walking around the perimeter of the wagon wheel or of a wagon wheel. And those spokes are kind of targets to step to and keep your turns nice and wide. Okay, so put your intention on wide turns. The pictures over on the side, this is my 4-year-old. He was my very last minute model this morning. So he's ready to start his St. Patty's Day partying early. And he sort of understood the assignment here, sort of not, but it's good enough to hopefully get my point across. So if you look at this middle picture, he is showing, this would be a situation of when you have to do a tight turn, right? Maybe you're in a bathroom stall, Maybe you're in a closet, you know, you're just in a tight space where you don't have a lot of room, so you have no choice, but you can't do the big wide turn. So the point I want to make is if you are going to turn to the right, like he's stepping toward the green dot there, you want to lead with your right foot, okay? And he has 2 thumbs up there, right? This is my good move. And if we rewind back to our conversation about base of support, this allows his base of support to get big as he turns, so he's going to be more stable, okay? And it allows him to be able to weight shift. If we look over at the picture on the side, 2 thumbs down, because he is still trying to turn to the right, but he's leading now with his left foot. And so now his base of support has become smaller, right? He's leading with a crossover step that gets your feet tangled up and a much higher chance of freezing and falls, okay? So it was actually funny. I even had a hard time getting him to stand still to photograph that second picture because he just felt unsteady. You know, he's a 4-year-old with typical 4-year-old balance, but he did not like that position. I could barely get him to sit still, and he wouldn't bring his foot over as far as I wanted him to demonstrate. So, but it proves a point, right? So that nice wide base when you turn, I jokingly tell my patients, use your turn signal, right? So if you're turning right, turn your foot out to the right, use your turn signal, lead with the right foot. So that's for turns. Other cues that you can use are visual cues. So painter's tape on the ground, and you're going to try to practice stepping over the tape. Painter's tape can be really, I like that because it's not going to mess up your floor, and you can put it on the ground on your common paths that you have to travel. And then if you have company over and you don't want that showing, you just peel it up and then you can put it on back easily the next day. Sometimes the tiles or patterns on your carpet will be such that you can use those as cues. Step over the crack of the tile, step over the crack of the sidewalk, and use those as visual cues, right? So you're now, again, we've shifted from automatic to intention on stepping over the target. And then I just wanted to demonstrate in here on our picture, these little circles are called agility dots, and they're just small rubber circles. They're, I want to say like 10 inches, and they're non-skid, so you can step on them and they shouldn't make you slide. But I use those all the time when I'm exercising for clients as a easily movable target. So we use those on exercise if anyone's interested in getting some. And then my last cueing category is going to be our auditory cues. So the 2 most common ways people use this, it's going to be your metronome or music. So when we use a metronome, that's just something that's going to give you a nice steady beat, right? And your goal is to try to step to the beat, okay? You can order a metronome itself, or if you have a smartphone, you can download it. On the slide, I put free app is Metro Timer. That's what I use, but I downloaded it like 5 years ago, so maybe it's not free anymore. But I think it is, but I'm sure you can find a free one. But that picture in the middle there is the metronome that I use. And it's kind of nice. You can just slide to hit your certain beat. You can say, I want this to keep going for a certain number of minutes. And you can even, if you see the little button to the left of the silver circle, there's a tap button. And so if you want to figure out your walking speed, you can say, okay, I'm just going to do a comfortable walk from one side of the hallway to the other. And you can have your spouse sit there, and every time you take a step, they're doing tap, 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 tap. And then what that does is it's going to change the number on the display to whatever your cadence is. Okay. And so you'll say, all right, so when my husband Bob is walking, he's usually walking at about 55 steps per minute. So when we set up this metronome to try to be a cue, I want it to be just a little bit faster. So let's try to do maybe 58 steps per minute or 60 steps per minute. And so we just slide up and change that number on the display. And now you've got set to a 60 step per minute beat. So that can be a really nice cue. I think the metronome, in my opinion, it's a little bit more annoying to listen to. Like, you know, it doesn't bother me so much, but long term, I don't know that I would want to listen to that all the time if I were the one using it as a strategy. So I tend to start with music with my clients if I can, just because it's a little bit more enjoyable. And it, you know, it's not noticeable as a cue. Like when people hear the metronome, like, what's that? When you hear music, you know, no big deal. It's just they're listening to music. So when you're listening to music, I just find the guidelines I give my people are find music that is familiar to you and that has a nice steady beat. Okay, so just a strong, steady beat. And then the wonderful people at POWER, which PWR stands for Parkinson's Wellness and Recovery. And that's one of my favorite certification courses that we as therapists can take. But they went and made some pre-made playlist. If you happen to use Spotify, that's what this is here on the right. If anyone happens to use Spotify, these playlists, you would just search Power Walking, and some probably PT student took the time to go through and listen to music that's about the right pace for walking. Okay, so I use that a lot for people when we're trying to be on the treadmill or different things. But again, it just needs to be familiar, right, and have a steady beat. So if you like that music on that playlist, awesome. If not, find what you enjoy. Okay, so there's our auditory cues. And then I wanted to chat a little bit about the assistive devices on the market that I personally know exist. There very well could be more out there. I'm just not familiar with them, so I didn't want to talk about something that I didn't know. But the two that I know of that are designed specially for people with freezing of gait, the first one is called the U-Step Neuro. So this U-Step walker here in the top corner has some really cool features where there's a little attachable device that you have to order separate, right? So you can get the walker and then you have to order a second additional component that has a laser button that you can either tap on and it stays on. And then it also has, I believe, an option for a metronome too. So you can get that auditory cue, you can get the visual cue separate, or you can use them both. And then the other cool feature about the U-Step is it has reverse brakes. So on most walkers, we push the brakes down to lock, right? And then you unlock them and go. For the U-Step, they want to help prevent that walker getting away, right? When we start to walk too quick and then we get up on our toes and the walker gets out way far in front of us. So they have reverse brakes, okay? So in order, I have to think about this. In order to make it go, you have to squeeze the brakes. And then if it's starting to get too far away, you keep your hands there, but you can release. And then I also think, don't quote me on this because it's the new model. And so I'm just going from what I'm reading on the website, but I believe you can adjust the resistance of the brakes on that model to make it basically more difficult to push, to try to, again, keep it closer to you. So that's the U-Step walker. You do have a 2-week trial period where it's pricey. I know that, and I believe there's some insurance coverage if you have Medicare. As to the other insurances, I'm not sure, but you get a 2-week trial period where you can test it out, see if it's helpful, and then if not, they'll ship it back at their cost. So that's the U-Step. And then this next stride is something I've just learned about as I was preparing for this presentation and doing some research. I actually have this unit. They're sending me a sample that should arrive Monday. So I don't have personal experience with this yet, but I'm super stoked to try it out. But basically the next stride is the cueing unit that you can then take and put it on any assistive device. So you're not locked into having to use the U-Step walker. If you are using hiking sticks, right, or trekking poles, and those are the assistive device of choice for you, you can put that unit on your trekking pole, right? Or you can put it on the rollator walker, the kind of walker with the seat that you already own. So again, it's the laser light, it's the cue, and this one seems more portable. So they have a 30-day trial period again too, where you can try it If it's not successful, then you can return it at their cost. So those are kind of two cool options. And then a lot of information on this slide, but some insurance coverage is better than others on these. I don't know enough to be able to answer specific questions about coverage, but I do know that this organization at the bottom of your slide is amazing. They help fund services for people with Parkinson's. The only requirement is that you have Parkinson's, right? And then they will help you with the financial cost if needed of equipment, of personal training, of therapy, of whatever it is. So if you're looking at these things and you run it through insurance and it's just out of your budget, give these guys a try. Parkinson's Wellness Fund, they're amazing.
Lindsay, can I just comment on the reimbursement? I
Sure.
know for sure that Medicare does cover the U-step walker, but you have to pay extra for the laser device.
For
So
the additional piece.
yeah, the U-step costs about $500, and then the laser stuff costs another $250 to $300.
Okay.
But I know for sure Medicare will at least pay for the walker.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, so now we're into talking about off-time freezing tips. So not everybody has freezing because of off time. Okay, so off time meaning the time at the end of your medication dose, right, where you're waiting on that next dose to kick in. But if you do, right, then again, start with that neurologist for the medical management side. And if you're seeing PT and OT, I generally recommend that you schedule your PT and OT during your good times of the day, right? So you can get the most exercise. But if off freezing is a consistent problem for you, I think it's actually a great idea to schedule a couple visits when you're moving poorly, right? Because then they can do some problem solving and figure out how to make you safer, how can they modify the task to make you more successful, and things like that. So I actually would be intentional and try to get into your therapist during the times when you are not moving your best, and they can help you with that. Certainly just avoiding the multitasking, right? We talked about before how freezing can be an attention issue and having your brain have to attend to too many different things at once. So during your off time, your focus is on your walking, right? So if you need to get from point A to point B, hold the conversation until you've arrived, right? If your cell phone is ringing in your pocket, ignore it. If that's too much of a distraction, flip that phone on silent during your off times until you're starting to feel better, okay? Avoiding clutter, right? Oftentimes, particularly if on the slide where the visual spatial issues, so the tight spaces, the doorways, obstacles, clutter, those are all potentially vision related things. If you relate to that, then you're gonna this next point is especially for you, right? So pull those throw rugs up, get the extra decorations out, right? You just want wide paths, and you want to avoid as many distractions as you can on that route. And that's, again, it's not that you got to turn your whole house upside down, but on your common routes, bedroom to bathroom, couch to kitchen, couch to bathroom, those kind of things, you really want to have nice clutter-free environments. Nighttime freezing can be a big problem. So certainly we want to make sure we have good lighting. Like I love the motion activated lighting. And that's really important if you're getting up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It's dark. You might be stiff, rigid from laying still all night. You might have an urgency. You might be rushing, right? Because you have to get to the bathroom quickly. And then the meds might be at a lower level at night. So certainly nighttime is a time to pay extra attention to. Again, I like automatic lights from the bed to the bathroom. And I like, if you use an assistive device, keep it right there, right by the bed. Again, we already talked about painter's tape on the floor on your common routes. And then for music, Alexa is really powerful. So if you're stuck and it's an off time, you can say, hey, Alexa, play my favorite song. And then Alexa can chime in. If you have some sort of an automated music system in your house, then Alexa can play in and basically help you get to where you need to go. I just turned my Alexa on. Alexa, off. Whoops. She listens. Kind of creepy, but she can be helpful too. Okay, and then I just wanted to share a little bit about, I think my perspective is a little bit unique in terms of my career path. So I've been a physical therapist, like I said, for almost 15 years. Most of that, 14 years of it has been focused on Parkinson's, still a physical therapist, but the first 12 years of that, my goal, in addition to being a PT, was to bring group exercise classes to my clinic. Okay, and so I was a Parkinson's group exercise leader, and I would do big classes similar to the pictures on this top row. To be clear, these are not me, these are not my classes. I didn't have any pictures of what I used to do, but they have that vibe, right? Those look very similar to some of the classes that we did. And so now I've pivoted a little bit. I'm still a Parkinson's PT, but now I'm not teaching group classes anymore. I offer a couple programs that are one-on-one training that either people do after completing PT to supplement PT or just in isolation. So one of the programs I do is called Anti-Freeze Bootcamp. We schedule 1-hour visits 3 times a week, and we do that for 5 weeks. Okay, so it's really shifted from PT and group exercise to PT and personalized exercise. So in that transition, there's been a couple things I feel like that I've realized the importance of as my view has changed a little bit. So one of those things is fitness and how much fitness matters. So as I've been doing the Anti-Freeze Bootcamp, there's definitely more of a fitness focus, and there's more of an assessment on fitness. And I didn't really realize how often people that are experiencing freezing of gait are really pretty out of shape, right? So it's certainly not everyone. There are absolutely exceptions, but I can actually only think of 2 exceptions to this rule, basically, since I've been doing this over the past couple years. So fitness matters, right? And we think about our categories. If we go back to that original slide where I had physical, cognitive, what were the other ones? Stress and visual spatial, right? In terms of your categories. Well, I think we could add a 5th category that applies to everyone, right? Like everybody, I don't think, I can't think of a single exception on this. Their freezing is worse when they are tired, right? So your Parkinson's symptoms are generally worse when you're tired, but specifically your freezing. Well, if you're out of shape, you move less. And then when you do move, your threshold for what makes you tired gets lower. And then the freezing gets worse, and then you move less, and then the threshold drops, right? And then you get tired with less and less and less and less and less. And so over the course of time, I didn't appreciate how much fitness matters, right? So simply getting in better shape, right? It's not that it impacts the freezing in a direct way, but if you're less tired, you're less susceptible to the freezing. So get in shape, right? And your therapist or your trainer can help you figure out a way to do that safely, right? Because a lot of people are having problems with that because they don't feel like they can exercise safely, but there's definitely ways around it. There's creative ways around it. So phone a friend, phone a professional if you need help with that. Frequency. I think that in my experience, people with freezing of gait need more repetitions of practice to make a noticeable difference than my people with Parkinson's without freezing of gait. So our boot camp, we have shifted from scheduling how I used to schedule people in group exercises, or the group exercises were twice a week. We schedule boot camp at Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right? So at least 3 days a week. And if I'm seeing them for PT, I try to do the same thing. I think more frequency over a certain amount of weeks, even if it's the total amount of visits, I'd rather have that repetition to get that noticeable change in the beginning versus more visits spread out over time. And then the last thing is personalization, right? Like if we get to spend an hour focusing on your problems and your specific triggers, certainly that's going to be more obvious progress than when it's diluted, right? Then in a group class where we're having to address a little bit of this, a little bit of that for lots of people. So personalization with freezing, I found to be a really, really big deal. And I, started to see, I can't say which of these three factors, all three of these things changed, but I believe each of these played an important role. And, I'm the same person with the same training and, basically the same approach, with the exception of these three things. And I'm getting results with clients that I used to see years ago, right? That I would argue the results are better now, despite being further into the disease. So fitness, frequency, and then specific to your needs. If we're talking about how to adjust your exercise program that hopefully you're already doing to make sure that we're really targeting freezing, or if you're not exercising, here's a nice way to start, okay? So every exercise program should include aerobic exercise. I have specifics written down there. You want to make sure that it's really targeted training, right? So what I mean by that is if you are freezing while you turn, you need to be practice turning, okay? If you're freezing after you stand up from the chair and start walking, that needs to be a part of your practice, and that needs a lot of repetition. The other piece is progressive difficulty. So you can't do the same exercises for 6 months and expect continued progress, okay? So if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. My people hear me say that more times than I'm sure they want to, but your exercise program, you want to be constantly progressing. So it's going to be challenging for a certain period of time, and then you're going to get better at it, and eventually you're going to be able to do that in your sleep, right, with your eyes closed. So if you're sitting in a group exercise class where you do the same thing every day, and you've been doing that for months, and you're saying my freezing isn't getting better, well, potentially that's a component of it, right? It needs to be completely, you need to be more challenged each time. And then that consistency piece, I kind of talked about that before. Definitely more consistency is better, and we want to be exercising for life. Sorry, I'm rushing through this. I know I'm almost over on time. General anti-freeze tips in relation to exercise. Okay, so generally, when you're learning what should your exercise program look like, I advise you to start with your PT, right? And then potentially they might say add in an OT on board too, but start with your PT, right? And they're gonna go through the problem solving. They're gonna help you figure out your patterns, what cues are best. Is there equipment that you need? Things like that. And then from there, you're gonna progress to exercise on your own or supplement. Maybe you're still in PT, but you're also doing extra exercise. So that's going to be if you can do a personal trainer for freezing of gait, I think that's a really valuable thing. But certainly, if not, group classes or videos or whatever other way you're getting your exercise, but the exercise needs to include the aerobic intensity and your specific practice to your triggers. As you are searching for your team, if they have a certification called PWR, which is POWER certification, that again stands for Parkinson's Wellness and Recovery. That is, in my opinion, the best certification you can get as a therapist or a personal trainer in terms of having a nice, well-rounded, comprehensive understanding of Parkinson's. So I would try to look for somebody that has that certification. The program is growing in popularity, so a lot more people do these days. But if you can't find somebody with that, that's certainly okay. There's still a lot of great stuff out there and people that know their stuff. But I would try to find someone that at least says, yes, I have experience with Parkinson's disease. Generally, when you're exercising on your own, try to exercise during your on times or the times that you feel the best so that you can push yourself as hard as you can safely. Certainly using cues that we already talked about. Music can be really valuable. And then, I'm a big fan of the assistive devices in order to exercise more effectively. So I want to take a minute to highlight this point because I think it's important and I hear it enough that I kind of want to bring some attention to it. So I'll have so many clients that maybe their freezing's kind of mild or maybe in the moderate zone, and they just like, I'm not bad enough to use an assistive device. I'm not bad enough. I don't need one. I don't want to become reliant on that. I don't like the stigma. And I certainly hear and appreciate that perspective. But my kind of counterpoint to that is if your movement quality is such that you can't exercise at the intensity that you could if you use some hiking sticks to help with balance, or if you could go out and take a nice long walk with a walker. And once you throw in that walker, well, now you can move at a speed that actually gets your heart rate up. Then the assistive device is absolutely worth it, right? And it's certainly not a step in the wrong direction. It's allowing you to move. It's allowing you to get your exercise and the challenge that you need, which is a huge piece of the long-term brain health. So, that was a lot. I went a little over an hour, but not too bad. So we'll make sure that's it. Yes, that is it of information I wanted to get through. My contact information is here on the screen. I am happy to answer any questions. I know we're going to answer a few right now, and certainly feel free to reach out to me after this, and I would be glad to answer any questions that I can.
Thanks, Lindsey. That was a information-packed hour. Thank you so much. So much information and so many great tips. We are going to answer some questions, and just a reminder to folks, if you have a question, you can place that question either in the chat. There also is a Q&A icon right next to the chat. So I've already gotten a couple of messages that folks have their chat disabled. So feel free to use either one. The first question that we have comes from Christine. She says, our PT told us not to look down at the floor when he's walking, but to look straight ahead. So we stopped using lines on the floor. Now we're confused.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's certainly a trade-off, right? So our posture tends to follow where our eyes go, right? So if we're looking down at the floor, then that also kind of facilitates that forward posture. So it's definitely like a trial situation. So I have some clients where without those cues, without the tape on the floor, he can't get to point A to point B, or she can't get from point A to point B. And so in their situation, even though it's not ideal, they're looking down, it allows them to be more, independent and safe. So certainly that's a fantastic question. The cues that we talk about, in some cases, they're a great fix, in other cases, they're not. So if you or your loved one is doing well without the cue, then heck yeah, use a different cue, right? Try to find something else first, or a cue potentially that's further out so that you can look more like out on the horizon to help with that upright posture. But yeah, that's a great question.
Come on, folks, good opportunity to get your questions that you have directly answered. Again, either type them into the chat or into the Q&A. And we do have another question. This is from Denise, and she says, a couple of years ago, I attended a seminar regarding freezing, and they touted the tango as a good anti-freeze exercise to engage in. I can't recall the rationale. Thoughts about this?
So, if you think about what that particular exercise would entail, it hits a lot of the points that we just talked about, right? You've got your music, so there's a nice external cue. You're potentially targeting a lot of the problem areas. Like if we would rewind to that chart or that slide that I had that had all the different triggers and based it on the physical, cognitive, blah, blah, blah. All those triggers, or a lot of those, show up in that exercise, right? So you get that repetitive practice. So you get lateral movement, you get backing up, you get turning, you get having to do two things at once, right? Because you're having to follow somebody or potentially memorize the activity or the music, or excuse me, the dance. So yeah, I think that's a super valuable exercise approach. Certainly, you know, there's a safety concern, right? You have to make sure that you're in a position that you can do that safely. But yeah, I'm all for the tango. 2 thumbs up.
Sounds great. Another question. Any verbal cues I can give when he's on his toes? I tried flat foot, but that didn't help. He still festinates.
The stop and heels down, right? So 2 different parts, stop first, heels down, are the ones that I have the most success with.
Great. They're starting to roll in here. Elizabeth asks, I tend to fall when turning, and it seems to happen because one of my feet freezes. What cue would you recommend for this issue?
Yep. So certainly the focus on the wide turns, right? So if you have the space, try to walk wide, and again, visualize, like you might be able to just visualize the wagon wheel on the ground, okay? And so you're trying to walk around the different spokes of that. You might find that you need some sort of a cue of the tape or something like that. Like you can put an X on the ground in front of your chair to give you targets to step to as you're turning around to sit down in your chair. You know, you might find that you need some tape. The thinking of a steady beat as you're turning, turn, 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 turn. Those are ones I might start with. But also I want to emphasize the practice piece, right? So if you're in a situation where you can label where you're freezing so specifically, that's, I mean, it's an annoying thing for you, I know, but it's a good thing because you can say, I freeze when I da da da. So here's what we're going to do, right? We're going to practice freezing or practice turning over and over and over again. So the cues take you a long way. But also if you can get with a PT or an exercise trainer and actually have them, they can design exercises where you're practicing turning over and over and over again, right? Because you absolutely have the potential to improve that too, which is even better than the cue, right? Because then you're not reliant on the cue either. So combination of those cues, and then certainly if you can add some high repetitions of practice, that would be super valuable too.
That's great. By the way, you're probably not old enough to remember, but there was a song by the Byrds back when I was young called Turn, Turn, Turn.
Turn, turn. Yeah, I got you. Yeah,
So,
play that. That might be a good steady.
put that one in your head.
Yeah.
All right. So Greg asks, is there such a thing as too much or too intensive exercise? I exercise 5 days a week and often twice per day, pickleball, RSB, PWR, cycling. I experience the heavy legs and sometimes wonder if I'm not giving myself enough of a rest.
Yep. First of all, congratulations on that exercise. That's amazing. But yeah, there's always too much of a good thing, right? And so I kind of describe that high intensity exercise. I'll try not to get off on a tangent here, but the high intensity exercise releases this awesome chemical in our brain called BDNF that helps protect our brain from the degeneration of the Parkinson's. So I describe BDNF as a fertilizer for your brain, right? So when you exercise, you are dousing your brain in that good fertilizer, right? To help make all the new connections and to help protect against the Parkinson's degeneration. But just like a fertilizer on a plant, right? You can pour too much fertilizer on the plant and it can backfire, right? Fertilizer is a good thing to a point, but there is a point where it can be too much. So, you know, I generally kind of advise my clients, it kind of just depends on how you feel. Like I tell people, if an hour after the exercise, you're feeling pretty good and back to yourself and you're functioning well, you know, you don't feel like you're shuffling more, your balance is worse, then you're probably okay. And you have to separate that from muscle soreness, right? Because when we exercise intensely, our muscles are going to be sore. that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Okay, so muscle soreness doesn't really count. It's more like an hour later, is your function impacted? And if you feel like you're functioning worse throughout the rest of the day or more than an hour later, then yeah, I'd say I would back down a little bit, either give more space between the exercise or back your intensity down a little bit.
Okay, Fred asks, when resetting, do toe raises help to get started?
That's a great question. It's not a strategy that I have used with clients, but certainly if that's something that you've tried in your particular situation that's worked, then you know, go for it. But I would say, just thinking like from my normal approach, I'm generally cueing away from toe raises, right? Because oftentimes what I see with the problem with people is they're walking too quick and then they get up on their toes, and I want the heels back down. So that one seems a little counterintuitive to me. However, everybody's approach is unique, right? So if that's working for you, don't let me tell you otherwise, right? But that's not an approach that I would usually bring up. It's not something I would have thought to try.
Okay, here's another. His feet splay way out, so he'll catch a foot on the wheel of the rollator. How to get his toes forward a little?
So I'm assuming we mean kind of like this, like almost like a duck walk. So please type in if I'm not interpreting that right. Or let me know, Chris, because I can't see their questions.
Yeah, sure.
So I assume that's kind of like a duck walk, which that's probably a little more complicated than you can answer over a webinar, other than to say that could be coming from tightness in the hip, that could be coming from weakness, that could be coming from limited range of an ankle. See a PT. There's my sorry, I know that's not the answer you want, but there's a lot of different things that could cause that.
Okay.
But a PT can help you figure it out.
Mike mentioned that he had freezing before his diagnosis and starting levodopa. Then no freezing for about 3 years. I recently had back surgery for pinched nerve and severe leg pain, and freezing began a few weeks before surgery when leg pain was bad. Surgery was in January and leg pain is now gone, but I'm still recovering and still having freezing. I see Dr. Espe on March 26th. Do you have any comments or suggestions?
I would say, if my thought there is, if you're having severe back pain potentially, and then maybe you're not standing up as straight, then that can have an impact on the posture, which that can be the fuel for freezing. And oftentimes we'll see that even if the problem is gone, right? And I don't even know that he's leaning forward, so this is kind of just trying to guess. But if the back pain resulted in not being able to stand up straight, even if the back pain might be gone now, oftentimes we have to retrain our bodies to come up straight again, right? So posture can be impacted because of Parkinson's or the back pain. And then if you have both, it can be a double whammy. So I wonder if that piece of the pie might be impacting. And then the other thing, you know, I would wonder more about his activity level, right? So after he's been through what he's been through, is there more fatigue? Is there less exercise? Is his threshold for freezing dropped because of after the back issues? Did his basically fitness level drop, right? And so when we're tired, then the freezing shows up more. So those would kind of be the first two things I would wonder about and explore further.
Okay, we're going to have one last question, and then we're going to wrap up for the day. Fred asks, when my wife starts to walk, her left foot only seems to come up to her right foot before she would take a full step with both feet. So what might be causing that?
So that's your small steps, right? So that's a pretty classic Parkinson's symptom that can go along with the fancy term is hypokinesia, right? Which just means less movement, shorter movement in relation to the step. And so, you know, if you haven't already, I'd start with cueing intentional on step past your opposite leg, step past your opposite leg, and trying to work on that. And then again, sort of specific exercises, things that are geared to lengthen her stride. So you might try her in a situation where you put some tape on the ground, right? And you position the tape far enough apart that it would require that foot over foot stepping, right? Reciprocal stepping versus step together, which is kind of what you're describing your wife as doing. And see, once she has that cue, can she step past it, right? Because now she has a target. So that's a pretty common problem that we see with a shorter step on one side versus the other. And again, doesn't have to be me, the PT, but if she hasn't been to a PT, that's right in a PT's wheelhouse of something they could help her with practice and repetition could also help.
Thank you, Lindsey. Again, I'm just amazed at what a great hour and a few extra minutes this has been for on such a glorious Saturday. Maureen, have you got any comments to make before we finish up?
Excellent presentation. I learned a few things. So thank you for that. I especially like, you know, I always try and tell my patients about the wide turn, but I never heard of the thinking about the spokes of the wheel. So I'm going to incorporate that in my teaching too. So thank you so much. This was really good.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. And I appreciate the invitation and having the chance to talk here today. So thank you for the invite.
You're welcome.
So as we wrap up, I will remind everybody that we did record this session, as is our habit every month. You'll need to give us a few days to edit it down a little bit, and then you'll be able to find this presentation and rewatch it if you go to our website, which is parkinsoncincinnati.org, and click on the Learning tab, where you can find archives of all of our Saturday morning PD EDUs. You'll also find information about our annual learning seminar, educational seminar, the Harvey Chiat Spring Forum. That's coming up on Saturday, April 20th. It gets started at 9 a.m. If you, again, look on that learning tab and click on Spring Forum, you'll see a way to register for the event. It is an in-person, it is not a virtual event. It's at the Manor House in Mason, Ohio, which is just about the center spot for our service area. So we would encourage you to come out and join us. There's no charge. We feed you well, and it's going to be a very interesting day with reports from the doctors at the Gardner Center and at UC Health on what's going on with research in Parkinson's, and in particular, what's going on here in Cincinnati with research. So we would encourage you to mark that down, come and join us, and we'll all get a chance to see each other. Sorry you couldn't see each other today, but again, we had so many participants that we had to limit the video to the panel. With that, I will say happy St. Patrick's Day, party responsibly. And if two of you could party responsibly, then I won't have to. So with that, thanks and have a great day. Thanks, Lindsey. Thanks,
again.
Maureen.
Thank you guys.
And thanks
Bye.
everybody for joining.
Thank you.